Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out. It's great to see you all here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sonia Carley. I'm the Vice Provost of Climate here at the University of Pennsylvania and the Faculty Director of the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. And I'm very pleased to get to MC and introduce our event today. We have a very special and distinguished guest that I'm really excited about. So our spring seminar series has been really a remarkable showcase of so much climate talent here at Penn. We've heard from chemists discussing strategies for producing chemicals and fuels without petroleum. We've heard from lawyers about the promises and challenges of state-owned energy systems. And next week, we'll hear from Heather Boucher to discuss how the clean energy transition is essential for America's economic competitiveness and shared prosperity. I highlight these seminars because they make clear that climate change cuts across all disciplines, demanding expertise from every corner of our community and beyond. And today, we'll hear from Dean Andrew Hoffman, Gilbert S. Kahn Dean of the Veterinary Medicine at Penn Vet, whose work and research represents an equally urgent piece of the climate puzzle. Andy, if I may, is a large animal veterinarian who has spent his career advancing translational research and building bridges across disciplines. He's the founding chair of the Climate Change Task Force of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges and actively serves on several national advisory bodies, shaping how the veterinary profession and academics respond to climate change. Andy has also been instrumental in Penn Climate's work, serving in the inaugural role of the Faculty Advisory Committee for this year, 2025-2026, where his feedback, I will say, has been absolutely fundamental for shaping our priorities in Penn Climate. What makes Andy's work particularly important is his commitment to One Health, the idea that human, animal, and environmental health are all deeply connected. Andy embodies this idea in all of his work. As dean, he's built One Health into the fabric of Penn Vet by establishing the Institute for Infectious and Zoonotic Diseases, the Center for Stewardship, Agriculture, and Food Security, and the Wildlife Futures Program. He has also championed Penn Vet's expansion of dual degree programs that prepare vets to tackle interdisciplinary challenges on climate, on food security, on disease, and much more. Andy holds a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine from Cornell, a Doctor of Veterinary Science from the University of Guelph, Ontario, and is a diplomat of the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine, specializing in large animal internal medicine. We're thrilled that he's here today, so please join me in welcoming Dean Andy Hoffman.
Thank you. Is this working? Everybody hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Vice Provost Carley, for that wonderful introduction. I am absolutely thrilled to be here and look out and see so many familiar and new faces. There's obviously a lot of interest in climate and pizza. So, and have an opportunity to talk to you about climate change from the perspective of myself as a veterinarian, but also I speak for many of my colleagues that are engaged in this area. So I very much appreciate the invitation and the place for that. So that's what I'm going to talk about, and I think it's very important for me to make a point that the acknowledgments didn't fit on this slide. I mean, since I've been here, so I've been here almost 8 years as dean, came from Tufts University, so I came sort of from the outside. And when I got here, I saw some really vibrant, nascent efforts around climate change, which have grown immensely, and I have grown along with them. And I'm just very appreciative of everybody, many of which are in the room, that have contributed to inspiring, partnering, funding, helping us move forward in many different directions. I also say as a leader, you may consider that finding ways of collaborating across your organization, whether it's in academics or industry or government, is an effective strategy. And this idea of sort of transitioning from an impulse and excitement around One Health as a collaborative framework to something maybe a little more specific but more broadly impactful in the environment today, which is climate change, was a real strategy that we made at the vet school to try to reach out to all the other schools and make an effort to really develop both interdisciplinary and interprofessional opportunities. So thanks to everybody, and there's people that are not on here, which I have left out, unfortunately. But so this is sort of the outline of what I'm going to talk about. I think you can't talk about the lens of a scientist or a nurse or an engineer or a veterinarian or whatever without talking about the workforce. So I'm going to level you up on who we are as a workforce. Adam, great alumni is here. Nice to see you. And also, I'm going to go through what I think is really the crux of what should be part of the learning objectives around this, which is to understand the impacts of climate change on what I consider the three biggest areas of connection with veterinary medicine. Talk a little bit about organizations that are weaved in there that are supporting these efforts, and the importance of education going forward. So this is to say that the famous hockey stick published by Michael Mann in 1999, which talks about global surface temperatures, but we could put CO2 in there, we could put ocean temperatures, ocean acidification, variety of things. The trends in climate change are dramatic over a time scale that is just mind-boggling and continue to grow as a problem. From the lens of a veterinarian, there's two issues. One is the impact on the animals, and you can see the 6 animal groups, so you should not leave this room not knowing the veterinarians interact and interface with 6 animal groups, including invertebrates. But they also impact the workforce itself. And the workforce itself, who are veterinarians, take an oath at the time of commencement, which is coming up, to protect animal health and welfare, and that seems really intuitive around what veterinary practitioners do, relieve animal suffering. But we also are very much engaged take an oath to protect natural resources, promote public health. So again, they're getting into this One Health issue, which I will also reiterate, and the advancement of medical knowledge, which is of course research and engagement at that level. So to repeat, these are the 3 areas that when I talk to audiences about how veterinary medicine connects with climate, it's through the lens of these 3 areas. The one you know about most of us know, or the ones you know most about are animal health. We're obviously veterinary practitioners, but also our role in agriculture and food systems, particularly animal agriculture, of course, and to a lesser extent, cropland agriculture and plants and so forth. And then, of course, biodiversity. And veterinarians, of course, are engaged in all 3 of these. I'm going to start with animal health. And as I said, I'd like to familiarize you with our workforce. There's about 150,000 veterinarians out there right now. There's obviously one giant bar on this histogram, and we're looking at 71% of all veterinarians in the United States. It's a little less globally, but in the United States are engaged in companion animal practice. So these are dogs and cats and exotic animals, pets, this type of thing. And that's grown from 2003 from 60% to over 70%. So it's a growing area, and it may continue to grow, but the pet industry grew, and we grew along with it. So as we added veterinarians, we tend to add them here. And these other areas have been rather static in terms of the workforce. And there are problems with that, but again, those are areas where we have shortages. And of course, the administration in 2025 made them even more short, particularly in the area of government, veterinarians' role in government. But, and within the practice areas ranging from companion animal to mixed, large and small, to equine, to food animal and so forth, wildlife, lab animal, we also have people in different sectors, academia, government, industry, and you can see the numbers are a little bit smaller than private practice, and then within, we have about 7,000 specialists, board-certified specialists. My specialty is internal medicine, but which is the largest one, and there are, like in human medicine, a number of specialties. So it's important to understand this because there's a wide range of people, and these are the people that are impacted, and these are the people that can make a difference in terms of both mitigating the impacts, but also mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from that sector. So just general numbers, and then more specifically, the scope of what these workers are doing. As we mentioned, clinical practice is the biggest part of that, so it's not surprising we see people in working with different types of animals, including in different settings like zoos, shelters, and wildlife rescue areas and rehabilitations, but general and specialty practice. And then we have people engaged to varying degrees in academia, industry. Lots of, we saw on there that there were about 6,000 government, or sorry, about 3,000 government veterinarians, but that was federal government. And then we have in the states, we all have state veterinarians and states that are veterinarians that are involved in the Department of Public Health and the departments of agriculture and other sorts of parts of government, law enforcement, fire, rescue. And then we have veterinarians that were, some of which were at the Penn Washington event yesterday. We had a side event preparing for a G20, and there were some veterinarians from federal, global health institutes there that are mostly from the EU, but they were working in that space. So, and nonprofits. So that's the type of work that's impacted by climate change. And so this is sort of the thing like you'd expect to walk out of here with, which is, so what are the climate impacts on animal health? This is probably the biggest, most important slide, which is why the text is blue for some reason. But I think there's some obvious things, and you see depicted here, is when there are extreme weather events, in particular extreme heat, flooding, and other sort of weather events, we can see kind of a snowball effect that occurs in animal health. There's injury, there's mortality, there's displacement, and then, as we'll get into it a little bit more, some of these infectious or communicable type diseases and factors, like antimicrobial resistance factors, bugs that become resistant to, or even the most sophisticated antibiotics, are carried in those water supplies. I mean, look at this in British Columbia. This is a poultry operation, giant poultry operation, and you see the water is just spreading all of that around, right? So very quickly we see a problem that is not only pathogens, antimicrobial resistance factors, vector-borne diseases, and so forth being spread very quickly between animals and people. And that's why I have up here, as Dr. Carley said, the triad that is the interdependence of human, environmental, and animal health, because in these incidents it can't be any more of a crisis and more obvious. So other factors that climate change is a threat multiplier for waterborne illness. Obviously, in these instances and across areas where there's increasing drought and increasing temperatures, where agriculture is becoming more of a struggle. You take the north of Syria, where most 2 million people moved out along with their goats, and farming is sort of very challenging there because of a long-standing drought. The people move, the animals move, or agriculture goes away, and that contributes, of course, to food insecurity. Because of the effects of climate on pastures and on raising food and so forth, we see contributions to malnutrition of those animals and foodborne diseases in animals and people. And then, of course, like you see this practice that got damaged in Hurricane, I think, Harvey in 2024, you see, just hospitals and clinics and clinical infrastructure destroyed. And of course, now people have to go, farther away and have more trouble getting actual animal health care. So I think this one was a zoo that broke open in a flood in Tbilisi, and all the animals were loose, and there were lots of pictures on that one, but I thought this one, someone like trying to get the hippopotamus to stop there. They eventually did attract, but that hippopotamus experienced a lot of skin damage and from the water and from abrasions, and so it's just an example. And I should just mention before I go to the next slide that there are a bunch of mosquito-borne, tick-borne diseases that are spreading geographically and altitudinally, and some of which are zoonotic that affect both animals and people that have animal reservoirs, and some are more animal-specific. And so everything that's happening, and this came from the American Pharmacy Association. I forgot to attribute this graph. This is a great spoken wheel graph talking about what type of impacts there are of climate on human health. And everything that's in there is happening in humans. We don't see as much lung cancer. We don't see as much, exacerbations of smoking-related illness or these types of things, or health equity issues aren't as prominent in veterinary medicine. But all of these sort of things are the same. So again, it kind of reinforces this idea that anything that we're talking about related to climate as a threat multiplier is pertinent to both veterinary and human health. So it does pay to use this as a framework, and I see it growing in the university. It's a collaborative, communicative, and coordinating type framework when we're talking about public health problems. In particular, climate change is a One Health problem, and it helps to build collaborations and teams and everything using this framework because of the obvious connections that are going between the problems and different species. So, of course, I wanted you to kind of walk away with a real pertinent, really relevant example. This week, I think it's going to be 93, 90-something tomorrow. The record in April, does anybody know the record in April in Philadelphia? 94. So we'll see tomorrow. And that's the kind of data we really worry about. Number one, dogs, for example, are not acclimated. Right? It takes like 60 days to acclimate to heat. And that's a whole physiologic, biochemical process, right? So dogs are going out in the heat. You have to be very, very careful. They are not acclimated. Number two, the mechanism by which dogs cools itself is unique. And if you plug into this QR code, you'll get the Penn Climate Insights, and you'll see a series of collection on this issue. But what's interesting about dogs is that they have fantastic panting mechanisms. So when it gets above 80 degrees and 35% humidity, they go from convection, evaporative cooling, to panting and evaporative cooling through panting, because they have these like blood sinuses up in their noses. So that air is going back and forth. It's cooling out the heart. It's cooling out the brain. And that's very effective until it gets to be 80% humidity. And then it's like panting doesn't work anymore. So if your dog's outside and it's over 80 degrees or over 85 and it's 80% humidity, there is no chance the dog can cool itself. And it will become hyperthermic. So that's a problem in some places of the world. We don't see, during the day, we rarely see 80% humidity here, but just so you know, like if you look at the nighttime humidity, if you look at the day-to-day cycle, you'll see the humidity will go up at night. Why is that relevant? In the rural areas, and there's been some studies that show that in rural areas, the companion animals, particularly dogs, are affected with heat stress more at night in rural areas because the nighttime temperatures do not come down. And generally, people in rural regions of the world are not using air conditioning in their houses, or less so. So the dogs actually, in the middle of the night, experience a surge in humidity and they can't cool themselves down. Whereby in maybe urban settings where there's a better sort of convention around using air conditioning. So these are the types of things to be careful about. So if you're like me and you see a dog and it's panting and it looks like it's in trouble, of course its feet are hot as well. You know, I will often say something politely to the person, but I try to. But what I'm looking for, but again, I want to make sure that I'm looking for something that's real, and I'm not just being a gadfly to somebody I don't know. And so what it is you see how far that tongue is out? So that's an attempt to cool through panting by running air across that tongue. Dogs don't normally stick their tongue out that far and flatten their tongue and squint. That is a classic, appearance of a dog that's hyperthermic. And hyperthermia runs through different levels, of course, and the panting is and stiffness and reluctance to move and looking for shade are all the initial things. And then later on, you start to see the dogs showing GI signs. They salivate, they vomit, and you're like, what is that dog doing out in the middle of the day? And if you take a closer look, there's some other signs. And then, of course, they show neurologic signs once they get to heat stroke. And in humans, it's different, but still there's a progression. At a lower temperature, there's a progression to an altered mental state later on. This is just a cow kind of doing the same thing. And horses are different because they only breathe through the nose, and so they go through this like really severe sweating. You have to walk them down to cool them because they cool by circulating it through their muscles and their skin, a large surface area. So you have to walk horses to cool them down, and then you hose them down. There's a progression and a sequence to do this and to get the first aid right. And so I want you to know first aid, like it's the most important thing to do before you do anything, before you freak out and transport your dog to the vet or anything, is to immerse them completely in cool water. If you can't do that, obviously get them in shade. If you can't do that, you can spray them and put a fan on them, but that won't work for really severe heat stress. And then if you have a trained working dog, this is a very effective way to mitigate heat stress in working dogs. It doesn't work to spray alcohol on the paws or the dog. It's just not very effective. People have studied and compared these fairly rigorously in scientific studies. So now you've got first aid certification. You know how to be a gadfly in the streets when you see those dogs walking in Philadelphia and it's 90 degrees and you check the humidity and you're like, oh my God, it's 70%. I better say something. And then you don't want to say anything. But anyways, believe me, it's like okay if it really looks bad. So anyways, there are some organizations, some nonprofit organizations. All of these, it's interesting, came out of people in academia that just felt like they would be more successful in developing an organization that supported the education for practitioners and sustainability of practices by doing it that way. And that's just, so several of my colleagues have formed these nonprofits, and they all have their own mission, vision, values, and their own sort of approaches. But for example, Vet Sustain is out of the UK, and they have the 6 W's, which you'll kind of recognize, heat, well-being, food waste, and waste in general, animal welfare, wildlife, water. I think it's 6 W's. It doesn't impress me as being necessarily the right structure for everything, but it works. Vet for Climate Action's out of Australia, which formed actually just before all the bushfires, and then it became kind of a big issue there. And they have aligned themselves with some of their climate care program, this is just one screen out of about 20 different hospitals that have been, 20 different screens of hospitals that have enrolled in a program to certify the clinic's education level and sustainability level. And they're all over the world. It started in Australia. So that's a really good resource for vet practices. And then, of course, this is out of Colorado State, which is an educational and certification platform. And I did want to make the point that things have changed in veterinary medicine. Dr. Duda and I were talking over coffee this morning about this. When I was in practice, private practice years ago, it was independently owned, and there was no such thing as a corporate owned or private equity owned practice. And we all went into practice because we thought we wanted to be James Herriot or the equivalent, and we wanted to work for a family-like practice and independent practice and mixed animals and so on and so forth. Well, what's happened is general practices represented here, this is not specialty practice, have gone to the present day around 35% corporate and private equity owned, and it's projected to get way up to about almost to 60% soon. Specialty practice and emergency practice has grown even faster. So if you're an academic specialist, you're more likely, maybe 85% chance you're going to go into private practice. Again, this is just to make a point about the workforce. Here you're looking at, these are the consolidators, Mars, Jab, Vetcor, the top 3 have got like 80% of all the veterinary practices in the world. This is not just the US. This is ownership of practices around the world. So you want to have a conversation about education, about mitigation, about scope 3, about about sustainability. These are stakeholders. These are people that currently in veterinary medicine that we need to address. And the theme goes on because these are big pharma and biotech companies. And again, the top 4 have most of the market, and they're producing drugs and biologics and nutraceuticals and IVs and all sorts of supplies for the veterinary profession. Big companies, enormous amount of profits, and 70% of the issues with carbon emissions from the veterinary healthcare sector, which is, without pet food, is probably up to almost 2.5% is estimated of all greenhouse gases in this country. It comes from these scope 3, including the whole supply chain and the consumers that are using these. So, again, because of this consolidation in both the practice and the pharma, these are people that we need to address, and we need to have solutions that help us address and help them address the problem. And this is just an example. Some of these companies actually, like Mars, make pet food. Pet food is an enormous drain, an enormous contribution to greenhouse gases. And the problem is that the selection of ingredients has the biggest impact. And most of the ingredients shown here, again, you can see this on a Penn Climate Insights article on the pet food industry. But most of the pet products are meat-based. So we're talking about, beef, lamb, poultry. You see them in the pet store, right? And so most of the greenhouse gas emissions come from the production of food, but mostly from the selection of the ingredients themselves. And most of the problem is because of meat-based diet. So 9% of global and 20% of U.S. livestock products go into pet foods. So again, these are not edible a lot of these are not directly edible or available to you as a retail consumer. A lot of these livestock products are things that we would either export or we would typically at home throw away. But these are the types of things that are produced into pet foods. So this is an enormous contribution to greenhouse gases. So how much is it? Well, it's pet food, maybe 25% of all CO2 equivalents from livestock production in the U.S. That's a lot, right? And just to give you a sense of what that is in 1 year, it's about, for the average size, 15 pound dog, 15 kilo average size dog, equal to 175 million gas-powered vehicles driving for 1 year. That's the pet food industry. Clearly, there need to be changes made. How much of that is the provenance of veterinarians and how much of that is the industry? I'm going to take most of the questions at the end, but go ahead. No, go ahead.
Sorry, was that for all of the whole industry or just for one dog and 175 million?
All dogs, so here's the number of dogs. Average weight of 15 kilos over 1 year. And so it's a little bit, whether the 15 kilos is, using as a mean, is accurate or not, that's what the published data is. So yeah, we could all have tiny dogs. That might help. But it might also help to go towards vegan food, which has a lower footprint. And then there's been some really good studies recently showing not only the better sustainability of vegan pet food, but that it has the macro and micronutrients that they need and that they have it's a healthy diet. Now, healthy lifespan is something that's in progress. We can't say that they're going to live as long, live longer, live healthier. That's the kind of thing that's coming out of long, longitudinal studies. Something to think about, and then I won't go into this much, but in 2022, we felt as a vet school we needed to acknowledge the climate crisis and be very clear about what that means, what the connections are. Again, those 3 pillars. And then connection to social environmental justice, the importance of speaking to climate change relates to inequities as well. And of course, aligning with the Penn Sustainability Carbon CSAP plan, which is carbon neutrality in 2042. And then, of course, state something about our academic and operational goals and how we're going to be accountable. And thanks to Katie Bailey and EII at the time, they're holding our feet to the fire every year. We're meeting. And, well, it's good. We're talking about what we're actually getting done. The biggest problem, and in the commitment, we actually acknowledge the biggest problem is that you really have to follow through with these things, right? Key performance indices, what are you doing? And then life changes and things change, and you need to keep up with it. Sonia mentioned the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges. This is just a consortium of all the accredited veterinary schools, and they have also come out with a statement, which was really, it's very important, I think, as a profession, that you do state your commitments, because there is ambiguity and there is obviously resistance. So if an organization can come out and very, very clearly say that they're committed, that climate change is real and that they're committed to the goals and so forth, it says a lot about the organization and the profession. And if you have any doubt about the importance of animal health, there's just a long, long list of things that animal health supports. Animal health and well-being supports many aspects of society, not only income and wealth and equity and gender income and equality and self-esteem, but also supporting mental health. And so there's a lot of things that will be lost if we let climate change take that away from us. So moving along, just a smaller discussion on the next 2 pillars, but we're looking at the most vulnerable farmers in the world are smallholders, and smallholders make up a large portion and about 1/3 of all food production, and of course in regions where there's the most challenges with climate change, the global south. So this is sort of the pattern of what we anticipate the world's human population to be, with increases in Africa and Asia mainly. And this is the distribution of smallholder farms that you see. The red is very small. And so you see sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, South and India. So these are the most vulnerable of the farmers, and they're producing a lot of food. And the issue is that there's also the regions where there's the greater amount of food insecurity, insufficient quantity of food, undernourishment, so under not receiving enough macro and micronutrients, and then food poverty where you just don't have enough money, and there's trade-offs between buying food and buying something else. So unfortunately, the co-localization of these really major nutritional problems with other problems, and climate is driving drought and other extreme weather events that are driving those problems and making it more difficult. But at the start, what we're seeing is, for example, if you take the number of cattle in a region in the United States and sub-Saharan Africa, you see, well, it's a lot of cattle, sub-Saharan Africa. The problem is abortions, calf diseases, they don't make it. And there's a lot of illness, reduced inputs, reduced nutrition of those animals. So they're not as efficiently converting those animals into meat, fiber, eggs, and milk, and so forth. So, and these are the problems that we see with calves and cattle. It's true for meat, it's true for milk. So you see there's a real reduced amount of feed conversion there. This is very inefficient. And in poultry, it's a little bit different spectrum. People are allowing their poultry to run around, and then there's predation, and there's diseases, and there's issues with heat, and of course, poor intake. So again, if we could solve the animal health issues, if we could provide a better infrastructure, a better environment for raising poultry, raising cattle in those smallholder farms, it would be a massive impact on food insecurity and poverty and nutrition. And the other thing to keep in mind is the key to the climate is keeping animals healthy has a massive, because of the inefficiencies that occur with disease, animal health contributes to efficiencies. That means you need less animals for a given land holding. And because of the efficiencies, you actually reduce the amount of greenhouse gases produced from livestock and poultry farming. So animal health is the most impactful thing we can do, and veterinarians are obviously at the nexus of animal health. Animal health also contributes to multiple sustainable development goals and of course profit. So the key to veterinarians is to keep pushing the envelope on how we can better reach those farmers and as a result improve their livelihoods and improve their nutrition. And then of course this is that blue text that indicates you're at the most important, no, not the most important slide, but these are the climate change impacts on animal agriculture that we see all the time, or we see in the literature. Eduardo Rico, who published one in Penn Climate Insights on dairy cattle and impact of climate change and heat on dairy cattle and what's going on in that field, just shows like over time, this is the temperature over 1 year, and this is the milk productivity. And this is what we see in a commercial dairy herd in the US. So it's really important to provide shade, water, and cooling and convection and so forth for animals, because even under the best circumstances of housing and nutrition and so forth, we see that effect of heat, which is seasonal. So these are, I'm not going to go through all these, but there's obviously a lot of things you recognize, some which are related to disease, and climate change is a threat multiplier that amplifies and compounds the disease burdens that we just talked about, not just in Africa and South Asia, but also in the United States. Damage to farm infrastructure is something that people don't really talk about after a tornado or a hurricane or extreme weather event, but it's actually quite common. And when you see those hurricanes coming through Florida, you'll also see a lot of fences down, you'll see animals running around, and it's not in the news, but that's a major effort to return those to operation. So there's a lot of things like salination of water and spoilage of feed that happens in these. So what kind of solutions are we looking at maximizing animal health? Genetic selection against some of the climate-induced impacts, which is drought, heat stress, and then exacerbating parasite transmission. So genetic selection of animals that are resistant to those factors. Obviously, provision of shade, airflow, and cool, clean water. That is not easy everywhere in the world, and particularly in extreme weather events. And then, again, methods to return agriculture to a more regenerative form that amends the soil and increases the surrounding biodiversity and improves the overall resilience of that land to shocks in extreme weather. And I just put this here again, like animal health, like veterinary practices, agriculture itself, this is the total scale of productivity, and this is the number of farms over this period of time from 1997 to 2017. So again, consolidation in the animal agriculture industry. Your stakeholders now are animal health companies, giant, livestock facilities, livestock and poultry facilities, and veterinary consolidators. We need to have a conversation with everybody. Not necessarily all at the same table, but it is important to address all of these consolidated and individual small operations. When I talk about regenerative agriculture in general, I have this really nasty, long text-filled slide, but it does, like each line, there's a solution. And so at New Bolton Center, we're trying to address animal agriculture using a number of these different techniques to improve the sustainability of agriculture. And so why? Well, first of all, agriculture because of animal health impacts, and secondly, because we have a problem with agriculture being an actual driver of climate change. You can see why some veterinarians are reluctant to actually get involved with climate change. Because, there's some really sticky issues here. We're trying to drive improvements and we're trying to mitigate climate change and sustainability, animal health. At the same time, farmers are getting blamed for producing those effects. But we've got to cross the bridge and we've got to have those conversations. So yeah, 26% of all greenhouse gases are coming from the food system, and then half of that and 14% of the total emissions arise from livestock and associated crop and land use. You see numbers all over the map, but that's what the global health organizations agree upon. Beef, dairy, and lamb are by far the major sources of greenhouse gases. We're just eating too much meat. I mean, one very simple solution is to reduce the amount of protein intake that we do in the form of meat. That would have a major effect. And methane is the major product. Methane is produced by fermenting feed in the rumen because methanogens convert CO2 and hydrogen that the bugs are producing. Some of these aren't even bacteria. They're called archaea. They're one of the first organisms that ever lived on Earth 4 million years ago. And they combine these and form methane. And methane is, a very potent greenhouse gas. And it's about 40% of all anthropogenic emissions are coming from agriculture. And that includes land use and so forth. But this is excluding the fossil fuel industry. And so some of it comes from the livestock that I talk about and methane production, but some of it comes from manure, from rice cultivation and fertilization and biomass burning that are related to agriculture. But you see agriculture is here in terms of total methane, and then we have fossil fuels are here, and we have wetlands have an unusual amount of methane coming off of them. But that's where methane comes from. It's burped out of the cows, and that's the number of animals we have globally right now. It hasn't changed that much. Cattle, sheep, and goats. And so we formed this institute in 2022, I think, and this center for the idea of stewarding agriculture and improving food security. And there's some really brilliant people here. I don't have time to go through all of their projects, but Dipti Pita, for example, who is a microbiologist and nutritionist, studies what called early life interventions, in that you can provide a cocktail of organisms through a probiotic to newborn calves, and you can compete with the formation and adoption of commensal organisms in the gut that are methanogens. And it has actually a beneficial effect on the animal's growth, productivity, and later milk production. So she's right at the nexus of producing something that not only improves animal health, but it reduces methane production. And has some patents pending on this kind of thing. Zenjai Dao looks at circular feeding vegetables and fruits to dairy animals instead of dry feed that's produced on landfills. So if you could substitute some of that land use for byproducts from the human food system, same dry matter, same kind of nutritional content, it turns out that stuff doesn't have to go into landfills. And when organic waste goes into landfills, it produces a huge amount of methane. How am I doing for time? Oh, 20 minutes. So I'm going to finish in 5 minutes. That's good. So we have time. So just so you know, the farms out at New Bolton Center, it's a 700-acre campus. And in the southern part, we have 2 wholly owned and operated commercial farms, which is very unusual for a veterinary school anywhere in the world, actually. Most, if not all, of the farms that are associated with veterinary schools are associated with the whole university, the land-grant university. And so we're kind of have our own. This is a swine farm. These are about 300 sows, and it's an organic farm. It's one of the only organic farms in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And as a result, there's been opportunities not only to look at organics, but organic farming also includes certain welfare-friendly practices. It's implicit in the certification. And so to be an organic farm is more challenging than just providing organic feed to the animal or keeping the environment organic. And you know, Tom Parsons is a world-renowned animal well-being, animal welfare scientist who's developed the Penn crates, which are larger crates that animals commingle in rather than in small individual crates where they can't turn around and that kind of thing. Done lots of research to show that the animals are doing fine in that environment, but also has, recently introduced AI into monitoring animals and looking at their motivations and preferences, and it's just a lot of interesting behavioral work that's incorporated AI into it, which has kind of spread around into other animal species. And Megan Pearden looks at disease surveillance, infectious disease surveillance across the swine industry, and so is a real asset to the Commonwealth in terms of scientific development around disease surveillance. And the earlier we can detect things, the better we can detect things, the better outcomes we're going to have in animal health. And Gary Althouse is a reproductive specialist. A lot of the diseases we see are of the reproductive system or are transmitted through the reproductive system in large animals, as you can imagine. And on this side, we have Eduardo Rico, who looks at animal health issues that are nutritional or microbiological in origin, but also is looking at a new, novel, more sustainable forms of protein, like soldier black flies that could be, or black soldier flies that could be used that would require much less land, right? Because land use is a big problem in terms of overall sustainability. So there's some really interesting projects, and that's just a few of them. I wanted to mention at the end biodiversity and climate change is sort of at the center and of all the factors that contribute to the decline in biodiversity. We have about over 15,000 species that are currently endangered. And you know, there's this is sort of the definition of biodiversity in case that you wanted to see that: genetic, species, and ecosystem diversity. I don't think I need to convince anybody that there's a value to ecosystems, so I'm not going to go through the ecological, contribution or services, as we like to say, that ecology brings to us. Pollinators comes to mind, fresh water, obviously photosynthesis and food. And I think, sometimes we don't think about how important it is to pest control, recreation, mental and physical health. So it's really important. Biodiversity supports all of these things. And this is what it should have been in the blue font, because this is like climate threats to biodiversity. So like this is kind of thing, if you walk out of here, there's clearly threats that are physiologic, biological, genetic, and ecological. And there's just some example: increasing ticks on moose, what's called phenological mismatch. This is where the birds fledge at a later date than their food supply is available, which happens with increased heat, and cyanobacteria that are destroyed from increasing water in lakes, and the cyanobacteria contribute to the pink color and the health of flamingos. Changing patterns of migration of monarch butterflies, and then we have this phenomena of temperature-dependent sex determination. As water warms up, we get more female turtles. That's a problem, as we know. We know there's some countries with lots of men and very few women and lots of and other countries where there's lots of women and very few men. So it's a problem in terms of growth control and growth and reproduction in humans. And last thing I wanted to say was that in terms of the overall impacts in this talk is that we talk more and more about how climate is driving diseases. And this really wasn't 20 years ago part of the conversation. There's really very little in the literature about how climate change was pushing the boundaries of vectors, of infectious disease, of pathogens, of AMR. And now we have whole disciplines around that using the One Health framework that focus on how climate is driving disease. And that is also a major reason for endangered species to face extinction is because of disease. I mean, you learned about the fungus that attacked frogs, right, around the world. We have a fungus. We learned about geomyces which is white nose syndrome in bats. You can see where there can be a major extinction event just from an infectious disease. And if climate is driving those animals out of caves or drive them out of their environment or there's less water or they're water stressed, you can see how ecological disruption could easily result in tipping towards disease. Or bats migrate into the city, as we see in Australia, and then put their droppings on horses, and then the horses get the virus, and then the virus is transmitted to humans, and that's the Hendra, I think, virus. So Hendra virus. So these are the types of things that are ecological cycles that are inextricably linked with human and animal diseases. So we try to combine our efforts, these programs that Dr. Carley had mentioned that we developed, because there's so much overlap in the area of animal health and diseases. And in terms of urban biodiversity, my partner, Julie Ellis, has started this urban nature initiative. What about Philadelphia? And she's put cameras where she's camera trapping images and recently received the Parks and Recreation approval for 13 new parks and sites. Super exciting. And then we have a large park system. Fairmount Park is 10,000 acres. I think Central Park is what, 800 acres? They got nothing on us. And there are foxes, and there are coyotes, and raccoons, and woodchucks, and squirrels, and flying squirrels, and all sorts of that are only visible on nocturnal camera traps all over these parks. And so they're starting to document this. Why is that related to climate and health? Well, the patterns how these patterns relate to even urban heat islands and health and disease are what she'll be documenting with her team going forward, having a strong baseline, and then incorporating that information to a national network. Philadelphia just wasn't part of the national network, so it's great that she's done that. Shamelessly plugging my partner. And then lastly, I brought this up a few times. I can't emphasize more with all the stakeholders that I've talked about how important knowledge, and trusted education. And I want to thank profusely my partner, Sam Huen, who really was the major architect. What? No, not that part. Work partner. Yes, let's be clear. I don't have two partners, just one. Unfortunately, this is recorded, so we have to be clear about these things. So yeah, thank you, Sam. Sam has been the architect and worked with the agency that built this, and she's also working with a climate leader group of students. I think Emma's here, Nabila's here. Raise your hand. Who are helping us build a climate and sustainability action plan for the veterinary school, which I think is really important. We find this type of educational opportunity for Penn faculty, staff, and students to work within their expertise. Students can write these if they work with a mentor, and then it goes on a platform so we can see what everybody else is doing. We can share the information, and then pretty soon, with authors' permission, we've partnered with Penn Climate and the Vice Provost office to push this out as an open access resource. It will still be only authored by Penn employees and students, but it will be available to the world. And so we're super excited to partner with Penn Climate on that. Thank you. I think it's a perfect place in the university as well, Penn Climate, to be launching and partnering. So please feel free to reach out to Sam or myself, our work partners, to discuss your submissions. And hopefully I'm mostly on time.
About 10 minutes for questions.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Or get pizza. Whatever you prefer.
Hey, thank you. My question doesn't come from me being a sustainability practitioner, but it comes from me being a dog owner. Should I be concerned about microplastic accumulation in my dog?
Wow, that's a great question. Of course, we have a real expert, Samantha McBride at Penn, who is somebody else I probably should have mentioned as an inspiring figure here. We don't know the answer to that, and there's two reasons why. One is that there have been studies on the basic, biological implications of microplastics to animal health that are mostly focused on interfering with certain immunological pathways, T and B cells. And there are major effects of microplastics on your immune system, depending on your level of exposure. That is not the subject of Dr. McBride's lab, which is focused on sort of more sort of biophysical or properties of those things. The other thing we don't know, so I don't know the answer, the other thing we don't know is how much is coming off of pet food bags, off of bowls. In our house, we got away from using plastics for our animals, which, I don't know, somebody freaked out one day when I came home and talked about microplastics. That might have been me. And we decided to change that out, but we just don't know. The other thing, it was interesting talking to Dr. McBride. She came over to my lab, which is a nanoparticle lab. And we were talking about the range of sizes of microplastics. And Luca Massanti, who's the director of that lab, is in the back here. And we had this conversation. It was so interesting that most research has been done at the micro, not the nano scale. So how many nano microplastics are out there hasn't really been carefully quantified. But if it's anything like anything else that's dissipating into particulates, it's probably an enormous part of it. So in other words, we haven't even measured necessarily what we need to measure. I'm sorry, that's not a great answer, but certainly I think that is a big concern going forward in sustainability. We have to get away from plastic containers and there's too much plastic in the entire animal health industry. One of the things that she's looking at is she is looking at microplastics in the medical field, looking at to see where they're being shed in plastic supplies. Corey, then Hime.
Thank you. This was, as expected, awesome. Learned a lot.
Thank you.
I was really interested in the slide you showed on the growth of private equity when it comes to private veterinary practice. And I'm wondering, I mean, you talked about the fact and the reality of that, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about anything that may be unique to veterinary medicine or veterinary practice that has made it susceptible to private equity. Like, are there things about veterinary medicine that maybe are different from human healthcare and the relationship between human healthcare and private equity that we're seeing?
Yeah, the patterns
right
are very similar in dental practice. And what's similar between dental practice and veterinary medicine is that insurance doesn't cover everything. So we have 4% adoption of insurance in companion animals, 4%. So people don't want to buy insurance. Don't ask me if I have insurance. In the large animal field, if you have a horse, you're more likely about half the time. If you have a horse, you're going to get some sort of medical or mortality insurance. So that's so insurance companies don't prop up the profits, and therefore the margins are small in all of these practices. The salaries aren't huge. It's easy prey, easy corporate takeover. And corporate actually is so interesting. They offered so much more than a retiring veterinarian could get from another independent owner. So their calculation was 20 times revenue, and they would say a 20-year return on investment. Whereas your average business person would be advised strongly against anything of that nature and so can they pay their people well? Yes. Can they provide the environment and structure and quality of care? Yes, all of that. They're just taking a much bigger bet. So, and if you look at the cycle of major corporations, it's periods of investment, losses, investment. But if those companies don't plow more into their company, they will continually decay. And so one area of investment that Mars came up with a long time ago, 30 years ago, was to buy veterinary practices and make dog food. And that's the biggest part of that company now. It's not Mars bars, it's not candy, it's the veterinary practices. So it was a pretty successful bet. So I think that's the thing, is vulnerability, cash flow, and shortages of veterinarians. So they saw growth in the pet industry, 6% CAGR. They saw growth in the industry. So it was kind of ripe for takeover. Dentist is growing about half that speed, corporate takeover. You'll see your dentist a lot of times now is like got some funny name like Smiles or something. It's a corporate takeover. I should, to be fair, I should also add that a company like Mars is very committed to sustainability. And I don't work for them. They don't pay me anything. So I don't have a conflict of interest with them. And I've met with them and been on panels with their vice president, Margie Mosher, who is a global sustainability leader. They're doing very well. And the other thing I should mention is that they are multinational corporations. All these animal health and corporations that own practices. So they're beholden to the EU regulations, which means the EU is actually pushing everything that's going on in terms of sustainability. The idea that we should spend, for example, as a national veterinary organization, a lot of time pushing them, holding their feet to the fire, and having them sign declarations now doesn't make any sense because the EU is actually doing it faster. So that's how we kind of diverted our attention more to education. That's kind of how that happened. I guess that all fits together. So Hime is next, I think.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. Kind of like related to what you mentioned recently about policy and regulation, and also making the connection with the workforce evolution theme that you brought up on your presentation that I really appreciated is like, what are some of the incentives for, I guess, more on the agriculture and food systems aspect of this? What are some of the incentives for veterinarians out there? Like I've heard, like for farmers, for example, that becoming an organic farm is terribly difficult and expensive. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, like, is it the same thing for animal farms? Is there an opportunity here to make this a carrot rather than a stick, or something easier for just to make this vision happen?
It's a great question. I mean, with the IRA, under the Biden administration, was exactly that. It included a large number of incentives for converting your farms to more sustainable operations, whether they're croplands or they're animal agriculture. 73% of agriculture in Pennsylvania is animal agriculture, and it's the largest industry in Pennsylvania. It's a $132 billion industry. The incentives that people had to turn to more sustainable related to the fact that there was money available. They get a better price for their food, and they had a whole other market channel, distribution and market channel, which could not necessarily be organic, but be something where they were more sustainable. The big problem that farmers have is the uncertainty and debt. The uncertainty is seasonal, weather, extreme weather, all these types of things. And so part of going to sustainability is they looked at the future and the future generations, and the younger farmers, of which there aren't many, said, I want to do something more sustainable. And so that fund just fueled all of that good stuff. And then, of course, I don't know how much of it's been ripped away, but right now it's very, very challenging to advance sustainable agriculture at the federal level. But I do think, yes, in animal agriculture, there's a lot of opportunities to reduce uncertainty, build resilience, and young people that I meet in farming, whether they're in the FFA or wherever they are, they don't want to do things the same way. They don't want to get into farming if it's going to be driving a tractor and someone else doing the repairs and acting like a technician. So just broadly speaking, I mean, this is a really exciting area where we can build soils, where we can build a healthier farm, more resilient farm, healthier animals, and a better market chain. Even generate energy and other forages that, you couldn't do that before. And young people want to do that, but they need the tools and they need the financial investments.
Time for one more question.
Katie gets the last word.
As it should be.
I don't mind.
I had a question about veterinarians as sort of a point of contact about climate change to their clients. I've seen statistics about like sort of how the general public respects people in positions like, medical science, like kind of listens to their doctor and believes what their doctor says. And I wonder what that looks like in the veterinary field, and both for on the companion animal side, but also on the agricultural side. Like, how could we really leverage the role of vets to get the word out about climate change?
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good question. Very good question. And veterinarians, nurses, and pharmacists are the top 3 trusted professions based on Pew and Gallup and a bunch of polls. I hope we stay there. And I think that does give us leverage for a lot of things, talking about mental health, talking about climate change. With farmers, we usually don't talk about climate change. It's like any other conversation. Catherine Hayhoe talks a lot about this, meeting people in the middle. We talk about extreme weather events. We talk about heat. We talk about very specific things, and it's completely understandable by any farmer. And so I guess there's a certain way of having a conversation, but yes, the answer is yes. Capital yes is that farmers, veterinarians are on the farm regularly. They have relationships with the farmers, so that just alone sets you up for having a more, a conversation on climate and on practices, sustainable practices, on animal welfare, on intergenerational issues and finances. And so, yeah, and we have a profit team that goes out now from New Bolton Center to the farms. And then we also have 10 ambulatory trucks that go out every day, 4 of which are dedicated to farm animals, 6 to equine. So we have people having those conversations every day. And actually, I had to survey them. I think it's a great question. Get a temperature of veterinarians and what kind of conversations that they're having, because frankly, I don't think we know. But I mean, theoretically, you're right. Hillary. It would be a great survey. I think, just taking a cross-section would be very interesting. So thank you. Thank you for all those wonderful questions and your attention.
Dean Hoffman, thank you so much. That was fascinating.
You're welcome. Thank you.